People, welcome back to Trending Gist Room. In a recent statement, Chidi ODINKANU made a bold claim that the older generation of lawyers made a mess of Nigerian justice system. Now, this remark comes in the wake of the arrest of DELE FAROTIMI, who was charged with defamation for allegations made in his book, Nigeria and its Criminal Justice System. ODINKANU argues that while FAROTIMI should face the law if guilty, the process has been marred by breaches of legal procedures. He points out that the arrest and subsequent remand of FAROTIMI contradicted the principles of justice, highlighting systemic issues with the Nigerian judiciary. ODINKANU's statement underscores a growing concern about the state of justice in Nigeria and the need for reforms to ensure fairness and accountability. For more insights on this issue, please watch the video, but before you do, kindly subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated.
After all, judges are human beings,
Yes.
and sometimes mistakes can happen, and some of those mistakes are not that fundamental. However, if it, and to do that, however, you've got to make sure all the parties are present, so that it's open what's happening. And so there was a particular case in Lagos in which one of the most credible judges, probably ever to pass through the High Court of Lagos at the time, Justice A.L. Balogun, encountered something similar in his decision-making, but communicated only with one of the sides and not all the sides in the case. And the Supreme Court took a very dim view of that conduct. If he had not been Justice A.L. Balogun, known for his integrity, his personal integrity as a judge and as a person, I think for most other judges, he would have probably lost his job, for instance. But nobody, I had the privilege of doing my court attachment in law school, actually, with Justice Balogun, and he was an extraordinarily honest, decent man. That was what saved his position in that time. But the Supreme Court can, of course, overrule itself. And when it wants to overrule itself, when the Supreme Court sets out to overrule an existing principle of law, it convenes a full panel of 7.
Okay.
Now, in this particular case, I think what the issue, from what I understand, I may well be wrong in my reading of the facts, there was an original decision relating to 10 hectares of land or something.
Yeah.
And subsequently, on an application for a review, that then evolved to 250 or something.
Yes.
So a fairly significant alteration of the final of the interest, the underlying interest in the case. Now, I have not read the record of proceedings, so I'm not going to hold forth on whether or not there was justification for that. But of course, if you're having a change of that magnitude in the underlying subject matter,
Right.
people may well have good reasons to question whether that is within the framework of the slip rule, or whether it is within the framework of an apex court, or indeed any court at all for that matter, to alter or review itself with a view to reaching that kind of outcome. I do think there could be legitimate disputes as to that, and I can see how such disputes could ultimately devolve to questions about the credibility of the decision-making. As I said, I've not read the record of proceedings, so I don't want to hold forth on that particular issue, but I could quite easily see that people may begin to think there are smell test issues involved in that.
Interesting. So in your own view, there have been quite a few commentary around how DELE FAROTIMI was arrested, how they came from Ekiti to Lagos and put him through a magistrate court that refused in its own ruling to deny bail the first time, asking that, look, go and bring a formal application. Days after, brought a formal application, and then they said that, okay, you know what, I'm going to take my time to decide. What do you think is happening in this matter, in your own view? What's your take?
Well, because of the way you frame the question, let me declare my interest. I'm one of those people who have who's done a commentary on this.
Okay.
So I don't want to come here and kind of pretend I'm innocent on this particular matter. But I think people need to know a few things about the underlying principles of law. Number one is that a magistrate's court is known as a court of summary jurisdiction.
Can you explain that to Nigerians?
Now, a high court, a magistrate's court is a court of summary jurisdiction, and a high court is a superior court of record. That means in the high courts and above, customary court of appeal, Sharia court of appeal, federal high court, national industrial court, courts of coordinate jurisdiction to the high court and above, everything should be on record. And so a high court, if these charges were before the high court will be well within its rights to say, bring an application in writing, because those are superior courts of record. Of course, every court is of record, but not every court is a court of summary jurisdiction.
Okay.
So a magistrate asking for an application.
Sorry, Chidi. So a court of summary jurisdiction means that when matters come, you deal with it summarily. All right.
Exactly.
Just so I understand. Yeah.
So a magistrate asking you to bring an application in writing for bail on a crime or a charge in which the maximum penalty is 2 years, either has not gone to school properly or has a mission to fulfill. With all due respect. All right? Now, there are 3 categories of crimes known to Nigerian law. Simple offenses. Simple offenses are crimes punishable with not more than 6 months in jail.
Okay.
And so you can dispose of those with fines and easily. Now, then you have misdemeanors. Misdemeanors are punishable with not more than 2 years in prison.
Okay.
Those are also not exactly the most serious of crimes. Then, number 3 are felonies. Felonies fall into the category of serious crimes that are punishable with more than 3 years in jail. Right? Now, the maximum penalty, let's leave all the other jurisdictional issues. So let's assume everything is right in this case. The maximum penalty for this particular charge of criminal defamation, the charge is brought against DELE FAROTIMI, 2 years. Yes?
It's not a felony, actually.
It's not a felony under any circumstance. Now, there is therefore really no reason. There's actually no basis. That's no basis for this procedure of, okay, bring a formal application.
For bail.
And then, instead of exercise, and secondly, that the suspect in this situation is entitled to bail as of right, because there is a presumption of innocence. But part of that is also a policy reason. In our prisons in Nigeria, over 75% of the people in metropolitan prisons are awaiting trial. Okay? That means that the prisons are not holding the kinds of people they've been built to, which will be convicts.
Yeah.
And therefore, we're spending assets and lean public resources on the wrong kind of people. And the average duration of pretrial detention is over 3 years.
In Nigeria?
In Nigeria, as we speak.
Wow.
That would be the average duration for a felony. And many of those people will never complete trial. And therefore, there are actually compelling policy reasons why the courts have to make sure that wherever the crime is bailable, they exercise the powers, discretion in relation to bail.
As it means perhaps also even decongest
Precisely.
those reasons.
Okay, so there is a presumption of innocence. The crime is modest at the very best, allowing for every other thing. And there are compelling policy reasons why the magistrate, as I said, any magistrate who will tell you to bring a written application for bail in this kind of case either needs to go back to school or has a mission to fulfill. On that, I'm willing to go on record. It is such a travesty of due process that it has to be said by somebody. But there is something else. You see, Nigeria has 37 or 38 legal systems. Every state is one legal system. The Federal Capital Territory is a separate legal system, and then there is a federal legal system. That's 38. And when you issue a warrant in one state for execution in another state, number one, the crime has to be a crime in the state in respect of which the warrant is issued. That's number one. Number two, when you take it to the state in which it is to be executed, it has to be, a magistrate in that state has to countersign and validate that before execution. We don't know whether there was any validation of the warrant
from Ekiti.
But what is very clear
sorry, you mean that the warrant that came from Ekiti had to be countersigned in Lagos?
In Lagos by a magistrate or a justice of the peace.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay? Now, that we are unclear about, and I'm not going to speculate about that. But when you are talking about issuing a warrant in Ekiti state for the crime of criminal defamation, there is no crime of criminal defamation in Ekiti in 2024.
Well, I read that, and I'm sorry to interrupt.
Please
I read that in your piece.
Yes.
So, Femi Falana, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, says that there are 2 states that have decriminalized.
There are 3. Ekiti is the 3rd.
I see. Okay.
Wale Fakbonda, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, was the Attorney General when that happened. Kayode Fayemi was the governor who signed it into law in 2021. You can verify from them.
Interesting, because, and I'm happy to hear.
Edo State has decriminalized criminal defamation. Lagos State has criminalized criminal defamation.
So Ekiti
State decriminalized criminal defamation in 2021.
Yeah, because everybody seems to respect Fakponda, and when I heard about it, I was thinking that Fakponda was Attorney General for quite a long time.
Wale Fakponda was the Attorney General of Ekiti State, who was responsible for shepherding the decriminalization.
So he actually also did that in Ekiti State.
Precisely.
So how is it then possible for Chief Babalola to write a petition, and the police acted, and they have now charged, because they've actually charged Mr. Farotimi.
Only the police can explain that, and the CP. Legal is a senior advocate of Nigeria, right? Now, so nobody seriously contests that criminal defamation. I'm honestly not sure that they knew that this was the case, that criminal defamation was not a crime in Ekiti State. But the argument now then evolves. Now that it has become clear that criminal defamation is not a crime in Ekiti State, the argument or the opposition has evolved or mutated. So they're saying, well, they are not charging him under the criminal law of Ekiti State 2021. They are charging him under the Criminal Code Act of Nigeria. Now, that does not exist as a source of crimes for the states.
Can you explain that?
And I will explain that. The Criminal Code Act was enacted as a colonial ordinance in 1916.
Okay.
At that time, we had 3 territories in Nigeria.
Right.
Protectorate of Northern, that's Protectorate of Northern Nigeria, Protectorate of Southern Nigeria, and Colony of Lagos.
Right.
Right? The Criminal Code Act applied to the South, the Southern Protectorate, and the colony. In 1951, we changed from that structure of North-South colony to a federation. And then, following the work of Governor General Bodilon, we split up the South into 2 different regions. So we now had 4 territories: East, West, Lagos Colony, and Northern region. The North, of course, had the Penal Code. And the Criminal Code Act then evolved into the ordinances for the regions.
Okay.
Yes? Now, when the states were created, when Midwest was created by the referendum in 1963, it became legacy law for Midwest. And progressively, it became criminal law for the various states.
So what became criminal law?
The Criminal Code Act then got adapted by the various states as a micro-territorialization, the creation of states evolved. It then evolved with them and became the criminal law for the various states of Nigeria. The federal government does not have powers. When you look at the exclusive legislative list, or indeed the concurrent legislative list, the federal government does not have powers over general criminal law for the states.
Interesting.
That means that the Criminal Code Act does not create any crimes for the states. It lapsed as a piece of source of criminal law for the states. The only...
When it did lapse, based on this analysis now?
It lapsed not later than 1967.
Okay.
The only territory in Nigeria in respect of which it is arguable that is applicable is Abuja, because it's a federal territory.
Right.
And I say arguable. I could dispose of that, but it's not necessary for this particular purpose. But as a source of criminal law, it does not exist in Ekiti.
Interesting.
And Chief Afe Babalola himself was involved in a 2021 case in which the Supreme Court decided a similar principle. The case of CIL against Ekiti.
What's the
It's the name of a company.
No, company, okay.
Yes? But this was a civil case. And in that case, Ekiti State, as in this particular case, had legislated out of existence a piece of legislation called the Public Officers Protection Act, which provided for certain procedural measures in terms of suing public officers. Right? Ekiti State legislated out of existence. And the argument was that since public officers were being sued here, the federal act, the Public Officers Protection Act,
right,
should be imported into Ekiti State to provide for what was not provided, what had been repealed by Ekiti State's laws.
Right.
The Supreme Court said no.
Now you can't do that.
That you cannot do that through the back door. Okay, you cannot backchannel legislation like that. If a state, as a federating entity, has elected to repeal a piece of legislation, you cannot force it through the back door to nevertheless be bound by a law that a state has legislated out of existence. So the principle of law here is very clear. Unless, of course, we are trying to manufacture something unknown to law, in which case we should say so.
It's interesting, this journey that you've taken us through, because, I mean, I'm sitting down here trying to make a sense of the fact, as you have articulated, that criminal defamation is actually no longer in the books. And even Chief Afe's petition referenced that, police action. And it's quite, I mean, it's very worrying, for some of us to have to even imagine that in a country where we pride ourselves as free citizens, a country that we are no longer enslaved subjects, we are no longer colonial subjects, that the very idea of retaining that kind of a law, which had a colonial mandate, they brought the law just so they can harass our nationalities and stuff like that. But to now find out that, in fact, Ekiti State in particular has actually ended I mean, it's no longer extant.
That is what the situation is. And, indeed, in 2021 as well, wasn't it? The Supreme Court took time in a decision that it issued in 2021 to provide the history of Justice Ogumumiju. Supreme Court Justice Ogumumiju provided the history in great detail of the evolution of the criminal defamation laws globally, in colonial history.
Right.
And, she starts by saying it is an invention, an innovation in Star Chamber. The Star Chamber was a paid and bought for tribunal in late medieval England that was notorious for arbitrariness, for everything that a justice delivery forum was not supposed to be. And it was meant to be beholden to the sovereign and to be a place where basically, enemies of the sovereign, real and imagined, were humiliated and defenestrated. That's basically what it was. And to think that at this time, and if I could go further and say that in most of the Commonwealth, to be fair to the facts, it's been eliminated, that the criminal defamation no longer exists. And the African Court on Human and People's Rights about 1 decade ago also eliminated it and actually said it does not exist in Konate's case. So the fact that we are here talking about criminal defamation and lawyers are salivating about it is worrying. Now, let me be quite clear. I'm not at all saying here that there should be no remedies for injuries to reputation at all. No, not at all. Particularly reputations that have been earned through rightly earned through hard work and investment over time. Not at all. But those remedies exist in civil law.
Absolutely.
The tort of defamation is very clear, and it can be slander, which is where it is oral and publication is oral and not in writing, or it can be libel, where the publication is in writing or more permanent forms of emission. And for those, you've got remedies in civil law. But you see, this is where the problem arises. And for me, I've got to be fairly upfront about this. There's got to be generational responsibility, because our seniors in this vocation have made a mess of the legal process. Why are we having all these byways that are shameful?
Yeah.
Because we've created a legal process that they themselves cannot get justice in. If you go to sue for defamation now,
it's a very important point.
you could be in court for another 50 years, right? You take 10 years through the High Court, 11, 12 years, 15 years through the High Court, preliminary objection, you go up to the Supreme Court, you get locked up there on an interlocutory point. By the time you come back, it is Lagos sued on a preliminary objection. Lagos, the most powerful state in Nigeria, in my view,
Yes.
was stuck in court for 18 years. And at the end of 18 years, the case was remitted back to the High Court.
Which case was that?
I think it was a lottery case.
Okay. Look
Right?
at that. So
Lagos was stuck in I believe the case started for 2005 or thereabouts. Sometime around that, right? 18 years.
Wow.
Lagos was stuck in preliminary objections. Now, our seniors in this vocation made a lot of money and a lot of name
From
stringing
this,
out the process of litigation and making the process of litigation inaccessible to all but a few people. Now, in the twilight of their years, in the winter of their years, they find that they cannot get that same process,
cannot deliver justice to them.
cannot give them justice.
And so they have to
now
browbeat.
they have to manufacture things that are not in the law. This is my theory.
And I think this is what is happening. And it seems to now amount to punishing DELE FAROTIMI even before a court can hear his argument.
Look, I cannot understand how anyone can look at this in good conscience and call it law. What is happening in DELE's case? By all means, hold him accountable.
Absolutely.
I'm not going to hold brief for anyone on this particular matter, okay? But every rule that can be breached has been breached with impunity. And mind you, the context is what? That DELE, it is claimed, has made allegations about judicial corruption, which are supposedly false. Okay? This is the arcana of the issue. This is the gist of the issue.
True.
And in order to do this, we are showing that there is judicial corruption.
It's incredible. I mean,
How do you do that?
I've had to have all kinds of contestation with my lawyer friends, even some of my, people that you respect. And I don't understand why they are not arguing for a fair process.
And that is the only thing that anyone with a good conscience in this particular matter should argue for. That is, do this by the book,
By the books.
so that we show that what he is saying is
It's
not true.
But now you have...
But rather than do that, basically, if DELE had actually conspired with people to show that everything he said
Is right.
is said to have said in his book is right, he could not have produced a better script.
It's just...
At all.
Chidi, I must tell you, I find it very depressing.
No, I'm not depressed by this at all. I mean, I was telling a few colleagues not too long before this started that this issue, the argument over judicial corruption and, the state of the Nigerian judiciary is going to come to a crisis point. Maybe this is a crisis that it needs for everyone to see that these things are these things are as bad as people say they are. It is unfortunate, of course, that we have a magistrate caught up in this in Ekiti. Well, I was telling somebody the other day, it nearly happened to me in Kaduna State. All right? In 2019, the 2019 presidential election was shifted by 1 week.
Yeah.
On the 17th of February 2019, the governor of Kaduna State addressed a briefing in which he claimed that 66 people whom he said were Fulanis had been killed in Kajuru. Now, anyone who knows Kaduna State would know that this was a massive, massive bromide. Basically, it was an invitation to mayhem on the eve of a very desperate election.
Oh, wow.
Okay? Kajuru is at a frontier between the south and the north, and the people of the Adara,
Okay.
who inhabit Kajuru, are really the second biggest indigenous population in Kaduna State, right? And of course, at the time, there were contestations between them and the governor of Kaduna State, and their votes could easily have swung things in Kaduna State in either the presidential vote or in the governorship vote, much more likely. And so the governor basically was doing a code red on an entire race. That is exactly was what I heard. When you say 66 people of any particular race have been massacred on the eve of an election, you're asking for war. You're asking for retribution outside the bounds of law.
Right.
The police had told him, please don't do this. We are trying to verify that. The SSS had warned him. But
he still went ahead.
He went ahead and did it. And so I wangled my way. It was here in this studio that I came on this studio and said he was wrong. What he said did not happen, and it was irresponsible for a governor to do so. And I said we have to call him out. And for that, after the results of the elections were declared, he was returned. He instructed that I be prosecuted for injurious falsehood and for incitement. What I said from this particular
Abuja.
In Abuja. And so proceedings were instituted against me in a magistrate's court in Kaduna State.
Interesting.
Nobody served me with the processes. Nobody told me that was happening. And from what I saw, they had called up the case twice. I wasn't, because I didn't know, there was no way I could have spirited myself to that place.
Oh my God.
And then a warrant was to be issued for my procurement from wherever I was in Nigeria. While that was happening, a good Samaritan in uniform saw what was happening and decided to locate me wherever I was. And so he called. I was sitting down one day. I usually don't pick up calls from numbers I don't know. And he called me. For some reason, I picked it up, and he was like, this is happening here, and this is how far they've gone, this is the plan, and you've got to find a way of addressing this or do something to make yourself safe. So I had to instruct my lawyers in Kaduna State, Gloria Ballason, a House of Justice in Kaduna.
Right.
And we filed a preliminary objection in the court. We moved for judicial review. I can't even begin to describe for you on an open admission what happened in that case. But the good thing is we were able to slow walk the case. And when the magistrate retired last year, he actually did confide things that I find difficult to say. But part of what did happen was he was under pressure to make sure that I was reeled in. And for some reason, he had a conscience and decided he needed some excuse to not deliver on that.
And bail himself out.
And when he got the preliminary objection, that became his excuse for not doing it. But my friend Audu Mekori, who is also a lawyer of considerable seniority, Audu was abducted from Lagos, right? Stephen Keferson, another of my clients from Kaduna State, was abducted from Port Harcourt. And he was detained on the orders of the governor of Kaduna State, former governor of Kaduna State, for over 6 months.
Wow.
So these things,
this kind of stuff.
These things have now been routinized. I'm currently involved in some form in the case of Kizza Besigye, the opposition leader in Uganda, who was abducted from Kenya back to Uganda. But that's extraterritorial for our purposes. The thing is that governments are now doing these things. Of course, the extraordinary thing in this particular case is that this is procured at the instance of a private citizen. Yeah,
and a private citizen who many of us look up to, who is a legal luminary. Let me ask you, Chidi, I mean, you were formerly chairman of the Federal Government Human Rights Commission. Now, so this kind of a matter, you know, which clearly breaches the human rights of DELE FAROTIMI. What's the role of the Human Rights Commission? Are they going to have an observation brief? Are they, you know, what can Nigerians expect from the Human Rights Commission for this kind of Because this is a human rights issue. I just wanted to know what you think about that. You're on that seat.
I left the Human Rights Commission nearly
Probably more than a decade now.
nearly 9 years ago.
Okay.
I left on the 12th of December 2015.
Okay.
That was my final day. And I've not been into the commission since then. I've not set foot on the commission since then. I've not attended any event by the commission since then, because I think it is proper to move on and not look back. Let others do that business of looking back.
Right.
But also you have to afford oxygen to your successors to do things the way they are set up to do them. And I'm not going to presume to instruct the current managers of the Human Rights Commission, whether the chairperson, the governing council, or the executive secretary and his staff, as to how to conduct their brief. If I hadn't been chairperson of the National Human Rights Commission, I would have answered your question quite volubly. But because I have been, I'll beg to recuse myself from that question.
From that question, okay. I mean, it just occurred to me that, if somebody were to make a petition, to the human rights, but I do respect.
I mean, the Human Rights Commission has an office in Ekiti.
Yeah.
So I should think that the issues here are sufficiently weighty for the attention of the Human Rights Commission. Okay. What they choose to do is up to them.
It's up to them, absolutely, and that's fair enough. So how do you think that So you are one of the frontline voices when we're talking about judicial reform. What this case is representing to Nigerians is just reminding us that, okay, look, we do have a compelling assignment to try and reform the judiciary. First of all, how do you think this case is going to end? What's your prognosis?
As a person of faith, I never want to challenge the sovereignty or superiority of the Almighty. Because we are little pawns and nothings in the midst of providential plans. So that's the first thing. All of these, I'm a big man, I'm a big woman, I can do this, I can do that. All it takes is a providential touch on the light switch of your capabilities. And all of that is gone in a moment.
True.
And so, for all, that's the first thing, that's where I want to begin here, that people also need to recognize. It's, Nigeria is the one place where everything we begin with God, 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 God. And then when the moment comes actually for us to show that we recognize the sovereignty of God,
we do the exact opposite.
We fall our hand, as Nigerians like to say. Okay? So this is one of those situations where I begin that way. Do I know how this is going to end? I cannot pretend that I don't have a sense of how this could end. But it depends on what end means, you see.
Right.
Because, this case is going to have a sting in its tail. About that, I'm absolutely certain. I've got to say, I did my youth service in Ibadan. And you cannot pass through Ibadan without having some regard or even reverence for Emmanuel Chambers and for what has been accomplished in that place. And look, as Africans as well, whoever they may be, if, for people who have lived to 90 and beyond, we also do have natural regard for them. And there is a sense to, whatever their shortcomings may be, after that age, you've got to forgive, you've got to let go, and you've got to allow for the fact that the Almighty has given them, longevity in their innings on earth.
Yeah.
But what you really don't wish on any senior citizen because of that, also is for an obituary that then begins from the end, rather than from
all of the accomplishments of the past.
Accomplishments. You really don't wish that as the story of any senior citizen. And my hope is that in the end, that there will be cooler heads here, and somebody will remind all the protagonists here, that we are all mortal. And very soon, all of this will end. And as if, you know, it's not for nothing that Christians sing soon and very soon. Okay? Because whether you live for 5 years or you live for 50 years or 95 years or 112 years, it's actually soon and very soon.
True.
And that's really, you know, it's not like I'm a very religious person. I'm absolutely not. But I'm a person of very deep faith. And on these things, I really, really honestly would like to hope that people understand that everything ends soon and very soon. And therefore that we should step back and look at what do we want our obituaries to be. I hope this is not going to be anybody's obituary.